All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest Athletics Canada coaching webinar. My name is John LaFranco. I'm the Coaching Education Manager at Athletics Canada. And today we have with us Donna Harris, who is, among many things, the former Coaching Education Manager at Athletics Canada, also former Executive Director of Athletics Manitoba and of Racquetball Canada. She now does research and development in corporate wellness with Johnston Group in Winnipeg and consults with Too Good Consulting for clients both inside and out sport. She is an athletics coach, parent, and a sarcastic gadfly. Welcome, Donna. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good.
I should probably explain why I'm in a truck.
Yeah.
Might be helpful for people.
Donna is in a truck. The truck is not moving.
No.
You can explain the truck, and then I will continue with my instructions.
So I live in rural Manitoba. Our internet connection is unstable at best. So I'm in my best friend's driveway, stealing not only power, but internet. And I'm sitting in the truck because we're in lockdown in red and we're not supposed to be in other people's homes. So we're adhering to COVID rules and that's that.
So that's the most COVID guest we've had so far, other than like beyond having someone who actually has COVID. So very impressive, very impressive. So just for the audience, a couple things before we begin. You're all muted and your cameras are off. Donna's gonna go through a presentation, and there will be some periods where I'll sort of ask her some questions. We'll go back and forth. At the end, there'll be some time for your questions. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box. You can type your questions in there. And my colleague Kyle Smith is behind the scenes. He'll be sort of curating, analyzing those questions and passing them on to us so that we can, well, probably not me, but to Donna, so she can answer them at the end. The webinar is being recorded and it will be posted in the coming days on the Athletics Canada website in the coaching section under e-learning. And finally, coaches who've entered their NCCP number will receive 1 PD point for participation in the webinar. If you forgot to do that, that's okay. Just email Kyle, coaching@athletics.ca, and he will make sure that you get all the credit that you deserve for listening to Donna and I talk. So, Donna, you want to share your screen and let her rip?
Okay, perfect. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Today might feel a little bit different in terms of the coaching webinars you're used to being part of, because we're not really going to talk about athletes and we're not really going to talk about technical nuances or anything. We're really going to focus on you and your well-being. So today we're going to validate the coach experience. We're going to talk about life load and understand what life load is and why that would apply to you or why you should care about it. And we're going to talk about some applied tools to help you manage that life load. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussions. So just for context, before we get into the applied pieces, much of the presentation today is based on the outcomes of the research I completed in 2016 is when the data was collected. And what I looked at was the impact of passion on the performance and lives of elite level coaches and their families. So I interviewed 10 coaches who were preparing athletes for the Olympics and Paralympics, and I interviewed their partners to get a better understanding of what coach performance is and how the role of the coach actually impacts on the performance and lives of the coaches. So while the data was collected in very much the high performance context, the outcomes of the research we have found to be applied to all contexts in sport and to a number of roles in sport, not just coaching, but certainly technical leadership and others who are leaders in sport. And it definitely has transference into the corporate world. We've now taken this research and we've worked with provincial court judges, and we've worked with government employees, and we've worked with corporate environment or people who are working in the corporate environment as well. So this is the only academic slide in the entire presentation, but the study was really rooted in the dual model of passion. And the only reason I bring it up here is to highlight that passion can be expressed in a couple of different ways, both harmoniously and obsessively. And we have found that this dual model of passion, or this expression of passion, has shown itself not only in sport, but in the corporate literature, with musicians, with dancers, with people who are practicing yoga. So it really exists across all facets of our lives. And so we need to be aware of it, because once we are aware of it, then we can tame it or name it and use it for good, and sort of negate some of the negative outcomes that can come when we tend to fall to the obsessive side of the scale. And so when someone is harmoniously passionate about something in their lives, that activity is said to be in balance with the rest of their life. It promotes well-being, and it supports motivation in a positive way. And when we tend to swing to the more obsessive side of passion, it can have a negative impact on our lives and on our health. Our approach to the activity can be quite rigid. It can cause some imbalances in our lives. What we learned through the research is that you're not usually in one camp or the other, but that sometimes our passion can undulate and it can swing. So there may be times when we are more obsessive because maybe we need to be, and then there are other times when maybe we can be more harmonious in the way that we engage with something that we're passionate about. Neither are good or bad, but it's just important that we can be aware of this so that we can maybe negate some of the negative sides. The authors of the passion paradox have defined harmonious and obsessive in this way. So they talk about it and say we can either have a healthy, harmonious passion in which we seek mastery and experience the joys mindfully, embracing our passion, or we can have a less healthy, obsessive passion in which our lives go off the rails in pursuit of outcome goals that become toxic. So perhaps a bit extreme on their end, but all to say that the passion that we experience can be expressed in a couple of different ways, and that'll come out in the conversation that we have today. So I just have 3 slides to talk about the research, and then we'll get into the applied pieces. And when we talk to the coaches and their partners, we ask them to, what does passion mean to you, and how do you describe your passion for coaching? These were the terms that they use the most often. And so they talked about how passion can really capture you, how it's really alluring, maybe it's seductive and it's captivating, but there's definitely this pull that captures us and can pull us in. They talked about being all in, that you can't half-ass, pardon my language, your way around coaching. You sort of have to be all in. It demands your attention. And one of the coaches in the study talked about being, a passionate person in sort of all facets of their life, not just in coaching. And this one coach said, I collect comic books, and I have every amazing Spider-Man comic book that's ever been printed. And so he's all in that sense of his life as well. And they also talked about the emotional connection to coaching. So if you are fortunate enough to be a full-time coach and coaching is your job or part of your job, or if even if you're not engaged, but in a formal employment way, coaching is not just a job or just a volunteer role. A lot of times coaches care deeply about their athletes, and not just about their results, but about their futures and about them holistically. The other piece about coaching that's emotional is that there is a piece of us that is expressed in our coaching. It's if you're all in, right? You don't just disconnect and walk away and not feel connected to what you're doing. So it's not just a job or just a volunteer role. There's an emotional tie and a piece of you that's part of it as well. And finally, passion is necessary for coaching. We need it. It definitely fuels us, but we need to be aware of its power so that we can be fed by it and not extinguished by it. The other piece of the research that I think is especially important to consider in light of our conversation today is the sense of responsibility that coaches feel for their athletes. And so the coach number 5 in the study talked about being that one person. Sometimes there might be more if you're co-coaching or coaching as part of a team, but you're the one person that the athletes really trust, and they put their sport performance in your hands, and I don't take that lightly. And I don't think any coach takes that lightly. I know when I was coaching, I certainly didn't. And we definitely feel this sense of responsibility. And I'm not suggesting that this is negative. I think it's positive that we care so much about our athletes. But when we're aware of the way passion can pull us and the way it can draw us in, and we couple that with this sense of responsibility and this weight, it can really create a really strong driving force. And I suspect that combination of passion coupled with the responsibility can sometimes make it hard for us as coaches to sustain our wellness and to feel like we have a healthy blend in our lives of the way we engage in coaching and caring for our athletes and the way we engage in the rest of our lives. So just to summarize this section, passion is necessary. I think we we need it to fuel the extraordinary things that we need to do as coaches to help our athletes accomplish our goals and their goals, pardon me, and to help us as coaches accomplish our goals. But we just need to be aware of it so that we can negate some of the negative pieces with it, and we're able to use it for good to help us achieve our goals and to help us motivate our athletes. So I believe John has some questions we're going to chat about here, and then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks. That's a great summary of the idea of passion in coaching. So, you had a slide that said coaches feel responsible, and I know that your research was mostly focused on, or entirely focused on, high performance coaches. But when we're talking about coaches who are coaching at the provincial level, at the school level, high school, university, the athletes are maybe not all in sometimes, but coaches, maybe if they are, still feel responsible. So, what are some useful strategies to deal with development athletes who don't care that much, whose passion is not on the level of an Olympian? How does a passionate coach handle that?
Right. I think it's a great perspective, because we've all certainly been there for sure. I think in that circumstance, it's important to meet the athletes where they're at, and particularly in the developing stages in that context of athlete with that level of athlete, it's really important to find out why they want to be there and what they want to get out of the training group. So some athletes may want to be there. Maybe it's totally social for them. And as frustrating as that can be as coaches, right? They might want to be there because their friends are there. For some athletes, maybe the training group is a safe place for them. And they feel safe and they feel welcome and they enjoy the environment and the culture of your training group. Or maybe they just want to try something new. And so I think it's important to be open as a coach in terms of, your expectations of your athletes and your expectations of the training group in terms of the effort people give and the commitment that they show, and that you talk about why it's important to you. And then try to help your athletes achieve the reasons that they're in the training group. So obviously for coaches who are there for performance, meeting the needs of the athletes who are all about performance is relatively easy for us. It sometimes can be harder to support the athletes who are there for different reasons. But I think the important thing is to try to meet them where they're at and support them where they are, but be clear about what you need and your expectations of the training group. Because if it turns out that there's an incongruence there, then it would be better for coach and athlete if the athlete finds a group that maybe better suits their needs. But I think sometimes our role as coaches is to help people find their passions, and hopefully that lies in the sport that we're leading them in. But if it isn't, then we can support them in other ways, and if they aren't the right fit, then try to find a group that is.
Yeah, that's a good segue to my next question. No, you mentioned like the Spider-Man comics and stuff, and I just I don't think there's anything that I care about that much in my life, like at all. Like, I mean, other than my kids, I guess, but
yeah, for sure.
It just that's intense, that's passion. So what if there's a coach who doesn't, feel that way? There's a bit of a pressure, I think, in the sport world to be all in, to be like, yes, like have that passion. And I think that it's entirely possible to coach and to like coaching and to be a coach without being, a fanatic. So what happens if you like coaching, you're kind of into it, but you're not, fully passionate?
I think that's great. I think that I think everyone just really needs to embrace being their authentic selves. And so if you shouldn't feel pressure to be all in or to bring a level of intensity that just isn't who you are. So I would say, if you like coaching and you enjoy being there, then do it in your own way and in a way that reflects who you are. I think there's lots of people that coach that may not be on the extreme end of the passion piece. Maybe they're coaching because if they don't coach, then there's no program for their kids, or if they don't coach, then there's nothing for the youth in the community to be engaged in. And so my research and my lived experience tells me that more often than not, coaches are passionate about what they do, but that also this passion can undulate and express itself in different ways at different times and in different contexts. So it may be that you start off as a coach, it's like, oh, I kind of like this and it's super fun. And then all of a sudden you end up moving through the ranks and it becomes something you're passionate about later on. Or you get into it and you find out that maybe this isn't the way that the passionate activity in your life. And that's That's totally okay. So the life load piece that we're going to talk about in the next section will be helpful for you, even if you aren't feeling a huge passion pull for coaching. We all, carry our life loads differently, regardless of whether we have a super passionate activity in our life or not. So I would say, don't worry about that, just be you. And if you do happen to be someone who isn't maybe as intense as the other coaches in your club or the other coaches in your program, then, maybe there's days where you can fuel or feed off of each other. So you can bring a sense of calm and maybe a different perspective to those around you that are super intense. And maybe sometimes the super intense humans around you can help you be more engaged than maybe you are. But I think the most important thing is be who you are, be authentic to yourself, and don't feel pressure to be any more intense in any situation than you are comfortable being as yourself.
So another fantastic segue to my last question in this section. You've been describing coach passion, but certainly coach passion, especially at the higher levels, can mirror athlete passion. So my first question was sort of about athletes who maybe aren't, but there are athletes who are very, very passionate. And one of the things I like to say, when I'm talking about this, is that the athletes put enough pressure on themselves. Like, I don't need to put pressure on the athletes, at least the high performing athletes that I coach. It's not, they don't need me to push them. So how important is it for coaches to appear, because again, like if I just sort of use myself as an example, as much as I don't collect Spider-Man comic books, I am passionate about coaching. And I do care a lot, and I can sometimes become, intense. But how important is it for coaches to kind of be the calming presence in the face of the athlete who, is the one who's living the thing, the performance, nerves leading up to it, or the feelings that you get after the performance? And what effect does that have on the coach, of like restricting in a way, perhaps our own sort of feelings? How do we deal with that?
For sure. So I think there's two components to that question, and John and I have sort of had this discussion previously. So I think there's a piece about emotion and showing emotion in that, and then in that question, and then there's also sort of do we hide our passion or not? So I'll talk about the passion piece, and then I'll refer to the emotion piece. And so I think it's important that coaches are open about the fact that they're passionate and they show themselves in that way, because we need passion, but I think we need a really healthy and mindful expression of it. So that's why I opened with a slide that talked about harmonious and obsessive passion, because harmonious and obsessive passion doesn't just apply to coaches, it applies to athletes as well. And so we need to understand how passion can be expressed and then share this information with our athletes. So there's really some rich discussions you can have about how we feel about sport and how we approach it. And I think as a coach, by showing awareness and then learning to harness passion for good in a mindful way, then we're able to not only model healthy behaviors for our athletes, but then we can teach them to do the same. Obviously, it'll look different from an athlete perspective than a coach perspective, but if you are able to make people aware of the way passion can be expressed and then model healthy ways of managing it, then those are skills that will transfer not only to athletes in their athletic career, but also in other parts of their lives, in and out of sport as well. So I don't think we ever want to pretend that we're not passionate, because I think passion is such an important part of what gets us through the day, particularly in challenging coaching situations, or what drives us to continue to be involved. And then in terms of emotion, we talk a lot, when I say we, my colleague Adrian and I, who's part of the Too Good Consulting Group, talk about just letting yourself and your athletes like feel your emotions and identify what you're feeling. So, I am feeling angry, or I am feeling sad, or I am feeling frustrated, and then try to unpack it. And obviously there's key moments to do that, like immediately at the end of an event that didn't go well, probably not the right time. But I think, and I think there are times when you as a coach, you need to be calm, and your emotional reaction may need to be unpacked later on with, maybe not with your athletes, maybe with a trusted colleague or with your partner or with someone that you trust. Or in some circumstances, it can be unpacked together. And I think, as you alluded to, John, there are times when, as coaches, we need to be calm and maybe hide that initial reaction or our initial emotion from from the athlete, so that we're able to support them. But then when you have an opportunity to unpack it with the athlete, or to make sure the athlete unpacks it with someone they trust and you unpack it with someone you trust. But I think the key here, whether you're talking about passion or emotion, is just being aware of our tendencies, so that and that can help us to anticipate our reactions and then have a plan for managing them. Both if you expect, a challenging, if you're prepared going into a major event, regardless of whether that's a regional, a provincial, or a national or international event, if you're prepared as a coach to sort of handle a good and a not so good result, then you're going to be able to manage your emotions in that moment, in a way that supports the athlete. And then sort of from a more global perspective, having that awareness of the way passion can express itself can help us be open about our passion, but then help ourselves and our athletes to harness it in a way that promotes performance and well-being, as opposed to being detrimental to it.
That's great. That's such a comprehensive answer, I think. And it, so just to maybe sort of shout out another athletics coach, Rich Lehman, who's the coach at Dalhousie. There's a video, if you go on YouTube, I think it's actually on the Athletics Nova Scotia sort of page, where he just sort of deconstructs the whole Dalhousie men's cross country team season. So it's a useful coaching video. But near the end, he actually has a really cool bit of self-reflection where he talks about his own passion and emotion after the meet, and where he kind of learned from his athletes that, he needed to dial it back a little bit. And it was great to hear him talk about it, because it just showed such self-awareness. And I think that sounds like that's like the key to all this sort of self-awareness. And now you're going to talk about, life load and some like ways that coaches can kind of practically become self-aware and sort of almost like force yourself to become self-aware. So let's move to that.
Perfect. Yes, I would agree. I think the awareness of the way that we react to situations and how we feel about them, and then awareness of sort of constructs like the dual model of passion that can have an impact on us, can be really huge in our abilities to understand ourselves better and then to take care of ourselves better. So the next about 9 or 10 slides is me talking a lot, and then we'll get a break with John again. And so we're really going to focus on life load. And I really love this quote, because I think, a lot of times, I think when we talk about self-care or recovery or taking care of ourselves, or whatever language you want to use, we often think that it means that we have to do less, or that we are somehow weakened. And I think really, it's really not about the load that breaks you. It's really about how you carry it and how you manage it. So, and understanding what makes a load high for you, and what drains you and what fuels you. So I'm not suggesting at all in this next section that we should avoid load, but we need to have a sense of how it feels for us, and what we need, and then how we respond to it. So all of you as coaches understand load implicitly. I'm sure of it, because it's such a huge part of what we do as coaches, particularly in track and field, because we load athletes and we need to understand, what the volume and intensity, how it impacts on how an athlete responds day to day. And we need to understand, how the cumulative load of the week is going to impact their ability to train and recover. So we manage and manipulate this as coaches all the time. And I'm sure as coaches too, you think about your training load for your athletes doesn't just comprise the couple hours a day that you see them, but that it also, what else is going on in their lives has an impact. So if you're dealing with athletes who are in school full time, and athletes that maybe at the developmental level are multi-sport athletes, or they're track and field athletes and they're also dancing, or they're involved at school in a number of extracurricular activities. And then they have lives, right? Like they have friends and they have partners and they have, other elements to their lives outside of work and school and training. And all of those elements comprise our load. And you are the same as a coach, right? You have a load on you as a coach. Some of you have full-time jobs in addition to the work you do as a coach, or the volunteer capacity you have as a coach. You all have relationships in your lives with friends and family or significant others. There's not just one thing that loads us. Our life is a cumulative effect of all the things we have going on in it. So we all carry a daily load. And the other thing that's important to consider is that load is physical and emotional. And so sometimes, you know, to use an example of you know, sport administrator / coaching roles. So sometimes you might have a day where you're at the track all day and you're running a track meet and the load is like super high physically, but it's not a super taxing day in other ways. But then the next day you could have a series of tough decisions and tough conversations and a difficult meeting with your board. And so that day might be more exhausting for you than the physical load day. And the combination of the two of those days might make the third day of your week, you know, completely not so useful because you might be exhausted, or just you might just need some time to process the previous 2 days. So sometimes our load's high, and that's okay. The other thing to think about is that national team opportunities and other opportunities like provincial team coaching jobs or you know, additional opportunities increase our load, and there's nothing wrong with that. Today is all about awareness. So there's a number of things that can contribute to our load, and we need to be aware of it. You may also be in a situation where you have multiple bosses, quote unquote. So if you are a coach who's employed and maybe you're working at the provincial level and you're you have you know, part of your salary comes from a club and part of your salary comes from the PSO, and maybe part of your salary comes from another community group. There's 3 people who think that they have a huge amount of pull on your time, and all 3 of them may have no idea about the cumulative impact of what they're asking you to do is on you. Only you will know that. So I think there's lots of different ways we can think about load, and lots of different ways we can be aware of it. But ultimately, as coaches, we deal with load all the time, but we very rarely think about it in terms of what that means for ourselves. So this next slide is not about periodization. We're not having a periodization discussion, and we're not going to entertain any questions about periodization in the chat. This is simply to illustrate a point, and I recognize this is not the most current practice. So we just use this primarily with corporate communities to identify what happens when we place a load on someone. And so I think you're all probably familiar with the concept of, the basic concept of super compensation, right? You load someone, you make them tired, they recover. Over time, they should get stronger, and there should be an adaptation and an increase in performance. So nothing new there. But what I want to draw your attention to is the middle diagram there. And so what happens when we fail to recover is that we get caught in this vortex of doom, so to speak, where we aren't able to get back to a recovered state of what's healthy for us. And our load doesn't undulate, it just continues to get heavier and heavier and heavier. And this is where if we're not winding in, you know, basic micro self-care practices throughout the day, the cumulative impact of this over time can really hurt our performance as coaches, can hurt our performance as humans in general. We may not be at our best in terms of the way we interact with others. It can make us sick, and it can, you know, really hurt our ability to make decisions and be at our best. And so just a reminder that you know, in any training program, you need to identify where your competitions are, and then, you know, where are your periods for recovery. And we can really do this as coaches too, not necessarily planning huge blocks of recovery for ourselves, but rather be aware of what we need for our foundation and work in sort of mini or micro recoveries. And when I'm talking about recovery here, you can use the word self-care, unplug, recharge, it's all the same thing. The important thing is to think about this in a way that makes sense for you. There's this great story about Coach Wooden, the you know, iconic basketball coach, who the very first thing he would teach his athletes when they were new to his program was in the dressing room, and he'd teach them how to put their socks on. And his argument was, if you don't put your socks on right and they're not fitting well in your shoes, you're not going to do anything else well. So starting really at the foundation. And so again, if we forget to plan recovery for ourselves, we end up in this vortex of doom, this B, and that can really cause problems for us. For a long time, I think I've alluded to this before, we tend to think about recovery or self-care, any of those things, as sort of not that important or selfish or really, you know, fluffy things that we shouldn't do, or tough enough we can do it without it. But what we're finding on the corporate side is that the really progressive organizations are really embracing this and really trying to support it in a way that is led by leaders and then encouraged with others in the organizations as well. So just to harp on that point a little bit more, when I did the research, I asked the coaches in the study to talk about their recovery protocols for their athletes, and they would give me a ton of detail and go on and on for a significant period of time, which was great. And then I said, great, can you please tell me what the recovery protocols are for you? And none of them could answer the question. There was a lot of like, and some of them implied that I was mean by asking the question. But really what they came to say at the end was that the ability to recover is the biggest contributor to success. When we asked coaches about, what do you need to be at your best? What do you need for your performance? They talked about recovery as being the most important thing. Then finally, just before we get into this applied activity we're going to speak through, is just a reminder of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and particularly the bottom couple of rungs of that triangle. So the bottom of your triangle is really the foundation to your performance. This, self-actualization at the top, the ability to be creative and innovative and do our best, really isn't achieved if we're not able to take care of our fundamentals. So making sure that we're eating, that we're sleeping, we're moving, that we're hydrating, that we're in relative good health. So when we fail to take care of ourselves or ignore that part of us, our needs in that area, then we compromise the bottom part of our triangle. And as I've said before, high loads are okay, and short periods of time where, maybe we're not able to do that is also totally fine. But what we need to think about is from a sustainability perspective, is that over the long term, if we compromise the bottom of the triangle, then we're gonna have trouble being at our best. And so you think about this like a house, right? If your foundation has a small leak in it, you'll be fine over time, but eventually the bottom of the foundation caves in and then your house falls apart. So 2 key pieces to take away from these last couple of slides is that recovery and load needs to undulate, and we need to have recovery and protect your foundation. Make sure that you're taking care of the fundamentals. And the next activity is going to help you identify what your needs are and how you can do just that. So there will be a resource sheet that I've shared with John that he'll share with you following the webinar. And it has some links to some articles that you may find useful that support what we talked about in this presentation. And it also will walk you through this Code Your Week activity again. So feel free to just listen at this point, and if you wanted to do this activity later, the instructions will be there for you in the handout that comes after. So what we ask people to do is, before we code your week, is to do 3 simple reflection questions. And it's best if you do these and then walk away for 10 minutes or flip over the piece of paper that you write them on and not look at them while you do the coding activity. And the purpose of this activity is to help you understand what your load is and where you're spending your time. So the 3 questions that we get people to do are identify the things that are most important to you, and we recommend 5. There's really no magic number here. So things that are most important to you, what you need to be at your best from a holistic sense. So not just in your role as a coach, like what do you need in general to be your best human. And then the third one is just 3 to 5 things that energize you or relieve stress that you could easily fit into a day. So we ask people to do those 3 reflections. And then what we get people to do is code their week. So using different colors to identify different tasks. You can extend the hours if you need to on the template. Some people are up way before 7 and lots of people are still awake after 11 p.m. You can't see the whole thing on the slide right now, but it's a typical daytimer setup. And use a typical week of your life and just code in a way that makes sense to you. So shade it in, color it in, and just outline the elements, that are going on in your life. So when you're at the track, when you're at work, when you're doing prep work, when you're with your family, when you're working out, or when you're active, when you're sleeping, those sorts of things in a way that makes sense to you. You can also do this for a week at the games kind of thing, but a week that is typical to you or one that you're concerned about.
I'm imagining this, and I feel already that I have failed.
It's not about failure at all. It's just about awareness.
Okay, but I feel like maybe other people are thinking that, so I just wanted to verbalize it.
Oh no, that's fair. And I think we'll talk about this in a second, but I epically fail at this all the time, even though I'm immersed in it every day. Like life kicks our butts, and it's our job to just keep getting up and trying every day to make it better. But so this is really all about awareness. So I don't want anyone to feel bad or feel like they're failing, because it's really just about awareness. but thank you for sharing that.
Awareness of your failure.
Well, I'd prefer to frame it in a more positive way, but if that, I'll meet you where you're at. So how about
There we
that?
go.
I'll meet you where you're at.
Right.
Then once you've done that, then you do this sort of debrief about, what do you see and what jumped out at you, and looking at your days, like what for you means a high load and what for you is a low load. And can you see, an emotional load versus a physical load? And from your week, can you get a better sense of, what drains you and what gives you energy, right? And so, for someone who's wired as an extrovert, like being around a ton of people and interacting in a huge way, like being in a games environment, may be super fueling and like just amazing. But if you happen to be a human like me who's introverted, I love those environments, but they kick the hell out of me and I'm done for like 10 days after that. So having an awareness of what is high for me, what is low for me, what is draining, what is fueling, can really help us. We may not be able to change anything about our days, but it just helps us to manage ourselves better because we're aware of, our responses and we can manage ourselves a little bit better. The other thing that can help here is sort of identifying where there's pulls on you as a coach. So if you are someone who has multiple bosses and you are employed by several funders, this can be a way that helps you identify where those pulls are and maybe where there needs to be some changes or delegations, or you could use this completed tool as a discussion. You could take it to a meeting and show the people you're working with where the pulls are and where you need. We've worked with someone in the past who did this, and their coaching schedule, they're an employed coach, and their schedule took them through the weekend without any time off during the week. And so they weren't really getting an opportunity to unplug or engage in other areas of their lives. And so they were able to use this and then go back to their employer and say, you know what, on Monday mornings, I'm not available until afternoon because I need to take care of my family or I need to do things for me in this window and I've worked all weekend. And a lot of times the people around us may not have any awareness about what our reality is. And so just having that conversation can open up lines of communication and create understanding where there wasn't understanding before. So that's the, what you see. And then what you do is you go back to your list of what's important to me, what do I need to be at my best, and where are my energizing points, what relieves stress for me, and look at where they appear in your week. And they may not be there every day, and some of them may not even be there every week. The important thing is that there's an awareness to try to wind some of those things into your life some of the time. So, our lives are busy and they're pretty full. So it's not like everything on those lists is going to be in your life every day, but just an awareness of them can help sometimes wind things in. And I'll talk more about simple ways you can wind simple things in a moment. So the important thing to remember about recovery is that it doesn't need to be a destination that you get to go to, every 6 months or once a year. Or this sign is struck me as really important just because it talks about prepared to unplug and reconnect in 8 kilometers. This is a sign that at the end of the highway where you turn left to go to Ucluelet and right to go to Tofino on Vancouver Island. And it shouldn't need to be like, well, in 8 kilometers, I'll be there, right? There's micro moments that we can take every day that can help support us in a sustainable way and help make our heavy load days a little easier to manage. So the micro disconnects that we can have in a day versus looking at it as a vacation we have to wait 6 months or a year for is that the micro pieces just compound over time and they can have a really huge impact. So if you think about just 15 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day based on a 7-day week is equivalent to 105 minutes in a week or 7 hours in a month or 84 hours in a year. And so some of the really small micro recoveries that people we've worked with have told us about is some really simple things like simply walking by natural light. So there's a cardiothoracic surgeon that my colleague Adrian has worked with. He's a really busy surgeon from the US, and he has 2 routes that he can take to the operating room. One goes through a series of hallways in the hospital, and the other route goes through a walkway with floor-to-ceiling windows. And whenever possible, he takes the route with the view to outside and takes a moment, takes in the air and breathes deeply, And then that practice helps him to reset and re-energize as he heads to the operating room. So probably a 3-minute exercise, and it really helps to ground him. Some of our colleagues use a movement timer, so they don't have to sit for a really long time, and it reminds them to get up and move, and reminds them to drink water. And some of the other things people do is enforce a digital sunset. So there's a coaching program that talks about setting a specific.
I'm putting up my standing desk. So there we go.
Okay.
You reminded me.
There you go.
So now
Perfect.
I'm not sitting anymore.
Perfect. That's awesome. And so the digital sunset is just putting your electronics away. They recommend 30 minutes to an hour before bedtime to help you disconnect from social media and your electronics, and take away from the blue light on your phone, which can interrupt your sleep. And so those are really small things you can do that can help recovery. So sometimes the challenge with recovery and self-care is that in the culture of our sport and the culture of our society, we don't really have permission for it. But it is really important. And it really is the most unselfish thing that you can do, but it can be really, really hard to do as well. So just the final piece in this section, well, actually there's a couple more slides. There's 2 more slides before we get to the question piece. So this is just another way, a different way to think about load. This is more of a cumulative look at load. This is a family load. This is one I did based on our family from a couple of years ago. So this represents cumulative impact of load from 2 adults, 2 kids, and 2 adults who were working in sport at the time, and 2 kids who were involved in sport. And I stole Les Gramantic's loading index that I used as a coach, and I just thought about applying it to our lives. So this is a broader picture of what's coming. So if you were to use that weekly overview to sort of get a sense of what a week looks like, this is what you could look like if you wanted to take the time to compound your load and get a sense of what is coming at you. Sometimes I find if we just look at it as a day or as a week, sometimes we don't see a big load that's coming at us. And if you put it in a way that makes sense, where you see it over the longer term, it can be easier to see what's coming and plan for it. So we're in a good spot when we get to that high load, and then figure out how we can support ourselves when we come out of it. And so sometimes when we get to a really high load, we just got to ride it out, but we can create a plan to sustain ourselves through that heavy load and busy time, and then we can reset. Some of the coaches we've worked with have actually used this with their families as a way of opening up communication. A big part of the study, which I'm not going to talk about today, looked at the impact of coaching on the family and the impact of coaching on the partner. And I think we all know that from time to time, there can be friction in those relationships because of the demand that coaching has on us and the way that the coach family roles interplay. And so what one coach found is that he was able to do this and sit down with his partner and sort of say, here's the times when I'm really busy and I'm not going to be necessarily super available, but here's the times when I am. And him and his wife were able to come up with a plan that, worked well and removed a ton of the pressure, the incongruence or the friction in their relationship, because suddenly there was awareness of what was going on versus, I think in his circumstance, his partner sort of felt like she was in the dark. So I'm not suggesting this will solve all your problems or that this makes it easy by any way, but it does give you a different sense, a different perspective of what your load is, and also can let you see what's coming. And sometimes that can be a helpful tool with your families. Just as a note there, speaking of families and coaching, the 3 red bars of the very high load in the month of February represented when my husband was going to be at Canada Games. And during that 3-week period he was gone, there was travel for me, there was preparation for major events, and then there was something else going on that I can't remember, but the load going into that was high because there's a whole bunch of logistics that have to happen with friends and grandparents to make sure that the family needs are met. And then there's the time when you're on your own, and then coming home, the person coming home, there's a huge turbulence for the person who's re-entering the family as a coach. I'm sure you've experienced this, right? You're tired, you need to rest, your family's super excited to see you, but there can be clashes there. So what we tried to do, I don't remember if we were successful or not, we may have epically failed at this one, but trying to make sure that we have some downtime when there's an exit from games to allow the person who's been there to recover, and then allow the family to adapt to having them back, and allow the person who was home on their own some time to recover too. It's not pretty, but if you can see it coming, it's a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah, that's a good one. Like I always remember, like it's happened before where you know, I've been at something big or whatever, and you know, and I'm just like, ooh, can't wait to get home. I get home and I open the door and the wife is like, here's the baby, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
see
wait,
ya.
wait, you know. But I will say that, you know, in terms of self-awareness and stuff, what's been good for me is what I've appreciated is I love traveling. I love to fly. So for me, the flight home
Mhm.
is wonderful. Like I can really just chill out. Like some people don't, you know, some people are stressed. They don't like that. But for me, I like it. So I've kind of, you know, if you build that in and you're like, okay, flight home is your time to decompress so that when you get to the door, like you're good. Like you know, if you're not thinking of it that way, then you can think that you know, you kind of miss that window to
Mm.
decompress. But that self-awareness is key there.
Yep,
So,
for
okay,
sure.
so we're at like 15 minutes left. So keep going.
Okay. Okay.
Just wanted to give you a little heads up on the time.
Yeah, that's perfect. There's just a couple quick things left here. So to finish off this section, this is just some of the ways that coding week and that the larger life load example have been used. So there's a swim coach that we worked with, and they did an exercise similar to this with their club. And what they were able to do is take rotating evenings and mornings off. So for the coach we worked with, it meant that there was one morning every week where he got to have breakfast with his kids, and one evening a week where he got to pick them up from school. And they communicated this within the club, and so the athletes always knew what coach they were working with, and the parents knew, and it started to, you know, change the perspective a little bit, and acknowledge that the coaches aren't one-dimensional coaches, that there's other components to their lives. And speaking of the compound fact, you know, over 52 weeks in a year, roughly, that's like over 100 more contacts that coach got to have with his kids. So pretty huge impact for the coach. And for people who didn't have kids, it was, you know, they'd had the morning and the evenings to do things that were important to them as well. So whether, you know, there's it's not just about coaches who have kids. Coaches who don't have kids also have a plethora of pulls on them outside of sport as well. Another coaching team that we worked with looked at doing monthly long weekends. So every coach got this was just a pairing of coaches, and so each of them got a long weekend each month, and they would cover each other off, gave them an opportunity to disconnect and engage in other parts of their lives. We've already talked about how this can be used as a conversation tool. The other thing you can do is create an accountable recovery program or approach within your group. And so my friend Marcel Lacroix, who's a speed skating coach and has coached at multiple Olympic Games, did this on for the time he was preparing for Pyeongchang in 2018. So he created his own YTP for himself that focused on, you know, when he would be busy and when he would be unavailable and when he needed to disconnect. And he shared it with his athletes and his coach and his fellow coaches and his NSO and his wife. And he asked those people to help him be accountable to his recovery, to what he said he was going to do so that he could arrive at the Olympics in the best way possible. So a couple of other different ways that you can use that tool. The power of human connection I won't talk about here, but I encourage you to watch the TED Talk about that and the importance of connecting with each other and sharing our collective experiences as a way to combat stress. So I'm not sure if you want to pause and ask these questions, or if you just want to go to the end.
I think that a couple of them, you know, you did address, but I wanted to kind of push a little bit on one point,
Sure.
which was, so, you know, you've outlined a lot of good ideas. I think just ways that people can build in, you know, recovery, and it doesn't need to be, you know, like a big 2-week vacation. But what are some of the strategies that you use to make sure that you relax when you're supposed to? Because it can be, you know, sometimes you're like, okay, I have a minute. Maybe I should do that thing instead of relaxing, or like, oh, I do have a free, like the other day I had no Zoom calls all day. I just was like doing like work instead of just, you know, on different Zoom calls. And so I added a Zoom call at the end of the day because I was like, oh, I don't have a Zoom call, I should add one. But maybe I should have just not, you know. But that was to talk to the athletes in the club and stuff. So I guess it was okay. It was good for them.
Yeah.
But anyway, you understand my point though, right? Like
Totally.
how do you make yourself do what you are setting out to do here?
Yeah, for sure. So I think just to clarify, I'll answer the question for sure, but that none of this is easy. Like I'm making it sound really easy, right? Like, oh, do this loading pad and talk with your family and it'll be great. Like, no, there's no kumbaya in this at all. It is hard to do, and you're sort of always a salmon fighting upstream, it feels like. So I'll just quote by, or not quote, but sort of preface the answer by saying that my experience with recovery is sort of the way Brene Brown, for those who are familiar with her, describes her experience with vulnerability. Like, it was a street fight in terms of my learning to take care of myself and recover. So I fought it and it fought back, and in the end it won. But I got myself and my health back. And so I've learned to take care of myself because I really got into trouble when I didn't. I ended up hospitalized for a number of days, and I've had ER visits related to it. And so those are the hard reminders that are hardwired into my brain that force me to breathe at a stop sign, that force me to take 15 minutes and be outside, and to breathe, and to learn how to evaluate what I'm saying yes to and what I'm saying no to. So if you haven't had those reminders from the universe that you need to take care of yourself, I would encourage you to figure out ways to engage in them, without needing to get to the point that some of us have had to get to. And so I think sometimes we learn the hard way, unfortunately, and I still stumble, but now I reset faster. So I don't get as far down the vortex. So I'm definitely a work in progress, like every single day, but I use the AM and PM bookend approach. So this is, I don't know what author talked about this, but in the first thing in the morning and at the end of the day is when we have the most control over our day. And so I start the day every day with the workout when my family is still sleeping. And I try to protect this really seriously. And I no longer work past 8:45 or 9 in the evening. And I try to only have to work in the evening once a week, if that, so less than 4 times a month, because that's part of the disconnect, right? And I read nothing work related before I go to sleep, and not on an iPad, like a old school like book.
Paper.
Yeah, book, paper.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I try to stick to that even when I'm traveling, and I protect it. I try to have family time every day. So when my kids come home from school, between when they get home from school and when they go to bed, I'm just with them, and I find that is really grounding for me. That's something that's really important for me. And I don't use social media for personal use at all anymore. At all. It's not on my phone. And yeah, so, and I try micro recovery. So now I'm working at home. So I take breaks to play fetch with my dog, and try to connect with friends. And I allow myself to eat not in front of my computer, which is like, sounds super simple, but actually is really hard if you're used to that. And I just know that I can't control everything. So I just try to control the micro moments, and it's sort of like a habit. And so even just by starting off with like breathing at a stop sign once, then, you know, then it gets easier. I'll try it again at this stop sign, or turning it into a game, particularly if you're a competitive type of human, you can turn these things into games and try to create a game with yourself. But, and I think the biggest thing is I'm learning to be self-compassionate. So, you know, when you said, oh my God, I'm failing at this, like, it really helps a lot if we can just embrace the fact that we're human, and we're probably going to screw it up more than we get it right, but at least we're making the attempt. And so there's this great, I think it's a Japanese proverb that says, you know, fall down 7 times, get up 8. So if I screw it up one day, then I just remind myself, well, tomorrow's a new day. So try to get it right tomorrow, right? Because you're not going to nail it all the times. And there's going to be times when it spirals out of control. But if you've established good habits before, then it's easier to reset and use those things again, you know, once you've gotten out of it. And I've had to do that lots and lots of times too.
Yeah, for sure. Another one that I heard recently was that knowledge is learning from your own mistakes, and wisdom is learning from the mistakes of others.
Yeah.
So we don't have to go to the hospital to figure this out.
No.
Donna's done that for us.
Yeah, and I know there's several others who have as well. So it's certainly.
It's funny you mentioned like working at 8:45. I remember when we were working together on the NCCP project and stuff, and we tried to meet once, I think at night, and it was just like neither of us were was not working.
Yeah.
Like it's just like not happening. We're like, let's just stop, because it's useless. So it's no good anyway to like work that late, really. So
no.
Yeah. So I think you know, you learn too, like once you start, you know, doing that stuff, like as an example, not working late, and then you kind of go back to it and you slip up, you can actually see in that example that it's actually not that effective anyway. But if you're just so used to trying to like hammer through it, then you kind of just think that this is what you have to do. But once you get the distinction between like when you're working effectively and then when you're really not, then you know to just stop. It's like doing a workout. Like if it's a bad day and workout and like you're just not having it, then just stop, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's finish off your stuff here.
Sure. So just really quickly, just particularly given where we're at in the pandemic and stuff, it's important, I think, to acknowledge that obviously mental health is going to be impacted by your life load, and and mental health can have a huge impact on our well-being. And so I'm just going to show you a tool. This is included in the resources that can help you to monitor where you are daily, and it's something that you could use with your athletes as well if you want to. So this is we call it the mental health meter. It's a modification to the Canadian Mental Health Association's mental health continuum. And my colleague, Adrian, who's a clinical sports psychologist, worked with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers last year, and they together modified this tool to make it more useful in a sport environment. And so what this helps us to do is just identify where we're at by just knowing, if we're healthy, we're good to go. If we're hurt, we're probably still okay to keep engaging, but we probably need to make some modifications. And if we're injured, we need to be removed from the field of play. And so what you can do with this is use it on your own to sort of just get a sense of where you are and where there's a pattern. And if you notice that you're in the hurt or injured column for a number of days in a row, then it's probably a good idea to reach out and, tell someone how you're feeling, or get support from a counselor or someone with a clinical background to help you sort through what's going on. And it's also something you can use with your athletes. So some of you already may have really great and open relationships with your athletes, and they may be upfront with you, and some of you may not. And one of the coaches that we worked with found that he was using this with himself, and he introduced it to his athletes, and he was able to say to them, you know what, I'm feeling a little hurt, and here's how I'm going to manage myself today. So here's your workout. This was an individual sport. Here's your workout, and here's what I'm going to do to take care of myself. And was just able to be open how he was feeling without oversharing. Like, this isn't just, you can say I'm feeling hurt without having to go into great detail about why you're in that state of mind or why you've been there for a while. But it sort of creates this environment of openness and transparency, and then you can sort of start to talk about how you're feeling, and you can model healthy behavior around, mental health challenges, which can go a long way to supporting well-being and open the door to other conversations later on around, life load or taking care of yourself. And here's what I need so I can be at my best for you later. So I'm not going to be at these 2 workouts this week, but here's your workout, text me after, those sorts of things. And so it can be a really helpful tool. It has been modified by my colleague for sport. So just finally, before we go to the last question, just a reminder that looking after yourself may be the most unselfish thing you ever do. And I know this feels really counterintuitive, but it is absolutely true. This is a quote from Cal Botterill, who is a he's a sports psychologist from Winnipeg. His daughter Jen played on won 3 Olympic gold medals in women's hockey. His son went on to be GM with the NHL, I think the Buffalo Sabres. And he also does an extensive amount of work around self-care with a number of groups, including emergency room doctors. So just remember that it's not counterintuitive. It's really important. And you cannot serve from an empty vessel. Your car doesn't run on empty. Your iPhone or your smartphone doesn't run if your battery's not charged. So if you're depleted, you can't perform. So just my final notes here, I guess, would be like, please do not take this focus on self-care as a suggestion that you don't have to be tough. It is, we do need to be tough, and we need to work our butts off while being smart and mindful about how we do it. So there's no shortcuts, and taking care of yourself helps you to be sustained in your role through periods of hard work, but it does not negate the need for hard work or suggest that success is possible without it. So also I really hate the word balanced, because I really believe there's no such thing. There are just blends that change over time, and sometimes the blend is more work and sometimes the blend is less work, but there are always elements of both. There will always be blended, but never in balance. So sometimes your cup won't be filled every day, but as long as you add just a little bit and blend it, then I think sustainability is possible. So I know we're close to the end of our time, but I'd really be happy to have more question and discussions if people are able.
Yeah,
thank you. And thank you. It was really fun to be here today.
No, thank you. It's always good to chat with you, and it's nice we could do it, publicly for everyone else and record it so that people can hear the interesting things that you have to say. So I'll skip, we had kind of one other maybe planned question, but I'll skip that and I'll go to some audience questions.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I'll just.
Yeah. And then, yeah, we can come back to that. So the question here is that, you just sort of mentioned depression. Is it, I guess the question is like, what is it, the responsibility towards the athlete or the passion piece that can lead to depression of a coach giving too much? How bad can it really get? How do I know when I go too far? So I think that's it's a big, important, question about depression and coaching. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
So, so I don't have like my expertise is certainly not on the depression side and the mental health side, but I think in terms of the mental health meter, I think using some kind of tool like that where you're able to identify how you're feeling and how you're feeling over time is really important. And if you find yourself, over, more than a week where you're in, having an injured or a hurt sort of mentality, then you take that opportunity and to reach out to your, your physician or a counselor or even a trusted friend and just sort of say, this is how I'm feeling. And so I think that self-awareness piece is for sure really important. And if you're noticing that you're having those tendencies, then I'm not sure how much of it would be specifically related to coaching or how much of it could be related to, other things that are going on in your life and the context, because it's probably not just coaching, although sometimes coaching can be a fueling event and sometimes it can be a draining event. It depends. And so, but I think the most important thing would be if you have concerns in that area, is to speak to someone with a clinical background who can help you navigate why you're feeling that way and help you access the resources that you need to have support.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. It's a good answer. I guess so another question is, what can a club do to help support coaches and ensure they continue to have a healthy coaching career?
Oh, how long do we have? Do I get up on a soapbox now, or? So I think that's a great question, and I think that the more engaged, the more clubs and organizations that can ask this question, I think the better situated we'll be to have open conversations about the reality of coaching and what the actual pulls are, not only on the coach, but on the support team around them, whether that's a family with children, whether that's a partner, or whether that's just, the components of their life outside of coaching. So I think clubs can start to ask questions. I think they can start to sort of ask a coach like, oh, what else is going on in your life? Or what do you need? What do you need? How can we better support you? And you may be surprised at what the coach tells you. It's probably not things that are crazy or expensive. It might be things that are very simple. We've started to do a variation of a talk like this with administrators and clubs and PSOs. And I think in many circumstances, unless someone has come through the sports system and has been an athlete and a coach, they really don't have any idea about what the reality is. And so sometimes there's this friction that exists where a simple, a conversation or some information can really alleviate some of that friction because there's just a lack of understanding of context. So I think clubs can ask good questions, start to engage in conversations with coaches, and even you go through a variation of the Code Your Week activity and get a sense of what are the pulls on your coach and what is all going on with them. And maybe there's simple ways you can support them that help them to be more present with their athletes and remove some of the distractions from them. Like if they have non-technical roles with the club, sometimes those can be super distracting to a coach. So someone else can order t-shirts.
Yeah, for sure. That's
someone else can book hotels and flights and all that stuff and just let the coach be a coach. That can be a huge resource for the coaches.
Yeah, because that's load, right? Like that's a big load on the coach that you may have a passion for coaching, but you may not have a passion for travel logistics. And so if that's the case, then you're stuck, like,
or forms, right? Or collecting fees and forms and oh my God, like that.
I have
and
a
that
passion
was one
for
of the
forms, actually. I like forms.
Okay, well, everyone has their thing. So that's good. Everyone has their thing. But one of the things we learned in the research when we asked about, coach performance as well was that distraction, just let me keep my head in coaching. And so, yeah, if you're someone in your club who can, because you think about like, when does the travel and the hotels happen? Probably if they're working full time and then they're coaching for a significant period of time, are they doing that at midnight? Like probably.
Yeah.
It's
so
based on
maybe
experience, right?
things are happening that maybe mistakes are made and it's not as effective.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, our club hired an administrator, just university guys training a bit and stuff, and wanted to do some more stuff, and it's been great. It's been great for me. It's taken like I can see all the things that I don't have to do anymore. It's very useful. And I mean, that's a whole other question, I guess, like of club finance and stuff that we don't need to get into.
Totally.
But
so
even
volunteers. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Even like if there's just an awareness around, oh, here's all the things we're asking our coaches to do, and here's some things that you can do as a parent or a volunteer, right? Then that can help too. Sorry. And then definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
So final question is just from Sahid. Any books? Do you have any books you can recommend? You mentioned The Passion Paradox by Steve Magnus and Brad Stolberg. Any other books that people can read?
Oh yes, but I actually on the resource side, there's like 4 or 5 articles, I think. And I should mention that if you don't have a Harvard Business Review account, you're allowed 2 free articles a month. So I only included 2 Harvard Business Review, but and they're on more the corporate side, but there's certainly a parallel. In terms of there's lots of different books around self-care and stuff, but I haven't read it. I've read the 6-page summary of it, but Why We Sleep is a really good one.
I read that.
Yeah, Matthew Walker.
Yeah, I read that. So that was life-changing for me, for sure. Yeah,
the 6-page summary was life-changing for me also. I need to get the whole thing now. And it's not just specifically related to this, but Culture Code is a really interesting read, just around creating cultures that are safe and creating environments where people can, bring their whole selves and be present. I think there's it's totally corporate, but it's very interesting when you think about the sports side of it. And I'm trying to think, probably more I looked at more TED Talks and articles as opposed to specific books, but I can check my list and add it to the resources.
Yeah, so that's it. So we have a resources that are going to get sent out to you. So we will, we'll add to that, and it'll get sent out in the coming days, along with a link to the recording. So thank you, Donna, so much for coming and doing this, and from the back of your truck. That's great. The passion for webinars is there.
For sure. And I think at the end of the day, creating a support system that better supports coaches and helps coaches be sustainable is probably where my passion ultimately lies. So thanks for the opportunity to share knowledge and hopefully provide some support today. It was really fun.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, and thanks everyone, and we'll see you again. The next one up that we have is hopefully going to be about REDS for speed power athletes. So we had a huge webinar on REDS that focused on distance running. REDS for speed power coming soon. So look for that. Athletics.ca. All right, have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.